Your position no longer exists, Julian. The cold mechanical words hung in the crowded meeting room like a sudden layer of frost, and 40 pairs of eyes immediately locked onto me. My manager, Oliver Brooks, had called an emergency department meeting on a Tuesday morning, catching everyone off guard and disrupting our usual routines. I had arrived 5 minutes late with a hot cup of coffee in hand, whispering a quiet apology as I slid into the very last empty chair at the end of the long mahogany table. I had not even taken my first sip of coffee, nor had I opened my notepad when he delivered the blow. I stared at him, my mind scrambling to make sense of the sudden statement. "I do not understand," I said, my voice sounding much smaller and more vulnerable than I had intended in front of my peers. Oliver cleared his throat, adjusting his collar and looking everywhere else in the room, except at my face. "The leadership team has reviewed our overall organizational structure and determined your role is redundant," he announced, reading from a tablet. "This decision is effective immediately." The coffee cup trembled in my hand, the hot liquid sloshing against the rim. 5 years of absolute dedication, 80-hour work weeks, and personal sacrifice at Aura Systems ended with those brief, clinical words, delivered in front of everyone I had worked alongside. "There is a cardboard box already placed at your desk," Oliver continued, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or regret. "Security will escort you out once you collect your belongings." I looked around the large table. The faces of my colleagues suddenly felt like strangers. Some stared at their laptops. Others gave tight, uncomfortable smiles. Only Maya Patel, my closest colleague and friend in the office, looked genuinely horrified, her hands covering her mouth in shock. I stood up slowly, my pride fighting hard against the burning humiliation washing over me. "I see," I managed to say, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "The severance package is quite generous," Oliver added quickly, clearly eager to end the uncomfortable interaction. "You will receive 2 months of salary. Human Resources has all the paperwork ready for you." I nodded once, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down, and walked out. At 54 years of age, I was not what most people pictured when they thought of a technology wizard. I did not spend my weekends coding for fun or playing online video games. In fact, I had studied anthropology in college, expecting to spend my life analyzing human cultures and ancient societies. But life took a different turn, and I fell into an entry-level help desk job to pay my rent, only to discover I had a natural knack for understanding how complex systems interact with each other. Over the next 3 decades, I taught myself the ins and outs of systems integration. I understood that computer networks, much like human tribes, require a translator to communicate when they speak different languages. At Aura Systems, I had created a role that did not even exist before me, quietly keeping their patchwork of databases connected to their modern web platforms. At my desk, a brown cardboard box sat waiting, resembling a tiny coffin for my career. I placed my few personal items inside, taking my time to wrap them carefully. A small succulent plant that had survived the office drafts, 2 framed photographs of my late parents, and a ceramic mug my young nephew had painted for my birthday. The security guard, Carlos, stood a few feet away, looking embarrassed. Carlos had known me for years and frequently shared coffee with me in the break room. He murmured a quiet apology, telling me he was just doing his job. 20 minutes later, I walked through the glass doors of Aura Systems for what I believed would be the last time. There was no farewell party, no card signed by my team, just the heavy weight of a half-empty box in my arms and the bright afternoon sun beating down on my face. I drove home in silence, parked and sat motionless, staring blankly. Then anger took over. I slammed my hands against the steering wheel until my palms stung and tears spilled over. I went up to my 3rd-floor apartment, where my one-eyed cat, Pixel, greeted me with a soft meow, judging my early return from his favorite perch on the bookshelf. I set the box down and tried to clear my head, but my mind kept returning to the humiliation in the boardroom. My phone began buzzing at exactly 7 minutes past 6 in the evening. It was the main number for Human Resources at Aura Systems. I immediately declined the call, tossing the phone onto the kitchen counter. It rang again, and then again. By 43 minutes past 6 in the evening, I had 17 missed calls. Voicemails began to accumulate rapidly, and text messages from coworkers I barely knew started piling up. asking if I could please call the office immediately. At 52 minutes past 7 in the evening, a loud knock sounded at my apartment door. I peered through the peephole and was stunned to see Walter Thorne, the chief executive officer of Aura Systems, standing in the hallway, looking frantic and disheveled. I opened the door but stood firmly in the doorway, blocking his entrance. "Julian," he said, his usual boardroom confidence completely gone as he looked at me with desperate eyes. "We need to talk. The company is in a massive crisis. Everything has stopped working." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "That sounds like a company problem." "Not my problem," I replied coldly. His face went entirely pale. "The production lines have shut down. Nothing is communicating. We are losing tens of thousands of dollars every single minute." I watched him sweat. "And we need you to come back to the office right now to fix it." I let a slow smile spread across my face. "You finally realize what I have been protecting all these years, have you not?" Walter Thorne stood in my hallway, looking like a man who was watching his entire empire crumble right before his eyes. "May I please come in, Julian?" he asked, adjusting his expensive tie with a shaking hand. I considered telling him to leave, but my curiosity got the better of me. I stepped aside, allowing him to enter my living room. He walked in cautiously, looking around as if he expected to find a hidden control center where I was actively sabotaging his company. He looked at the bookshelf filled with old technical manuals next to my old anthropology textbooks, then sat down on the edge of the sofa. "The main production line went down exactly 30 minutes. After you walked out of the building," Walter explained, his voice trembling. "At first, the junior IT staff thought it was just a strange coincidence. But now, 3 of our primary manufacturing plants have stopped operating entirely. Customer orders have halted, and the system cannot get anything running." He pulled out his phone, showing me a real-time dashboard that was glowing an angry, persistent red. "We are bleeding money by the second." I sat in the armchair opposite him and remained silent, letting the quiet fill the room. "Oliver did not understand your role," Walter continued, his voice soft. "To be honest, none of us did. On paper, you managed outdated legacy systems, but we did not realize those legacy systems are the actual foundation that runs everything." I finished his thought for him. "The expensive new software your high-priced consultants implemented does not talk to our manufacturing equipment without constant translation," I said. Walter nodded, his face falling. "And you provided that translation every single day for 5 years, he admitted. The reality was that Aura Systems operated on technical infrastructure gathered from 3 different decades. Whenever the company acquired smaller firms, they simply inherited legacy systems that nobody understood. Rather than spending the money to properly upgrade everything, which would be expensive and highly disruptive, they just kept adding modern software layers on top, like fresh paint over rotting wood. I had become the human middleware, the only bridge connecting those incompatible systems. I wrote custom scripts every morning to synchronize inventory, manually transferred production data between platforms, and created workarounds when the new customer portal could not talk to our manufacturing lines. None of this was in my job description, and the executives only saw me as someone babysitting old computers. "Julian, I will be blunt," Walter said, leaning forward. "We need you back tonight. Name your price." I laughed out loud, the sound echoing in the quiet apartment. "You think this is just about money?" "Double your salary," he offered. "No, triple it." I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights. For 5 years, I warned the leadership team about our fragile infrastructure. I wrote detailed reports, proposed transition plans, and requested meetings to address these vulnerabilities. Every single request was ignored or dismissed. Walter shifted uncomfortably. "We should have listened," he muttered. "Yes, you should have," I replied, turning to face him. "But instead, you chose to humiliate me in front of my entire department." "That was Oliver Brooks making a foolish decision, not me," Walter claimed. "But you approved it," I countered, and he could not deny it. "What do you want, Julian?" he asked quietly. I told him I needed to think and sent him away. After he left, I poured a glass of wine and sat on my balcony, watching my phone continue to buzz with desperate messages from directors and managers I had never spoken to before. They were all begging for my help, pleading with me to log in and restart the server bridges. By midnight, I had made my decision. I did not call Walter. Instead, I called Dev Joshi, a brilliant tech consultant who had been trying to recruit me for over a year. The next morning at 7 o'clock, we met at a small breakfast diner. Dev listened in disbelief as I explained how I had been fired. 5 years of work gone in 30 seconds, Dev said, shaking his head. And now they are desperate. This is exactly the outcome I warned you would occur. You made yourself invisible by being too good at solving problems without demanding recognition. I told Dev about the shutdown at the main plant and the secondary facilities running at 15% capacity. They are facing a disaster, Dev said. Walter offered to triple my salary, I told him, but I am not going back as an employee. Dev smiled. Join my consultancy and we will charge them premium rates, he suggested. I shook my head. No, I am starting my own firm, Advanced Systems Integration. Dev looked surprised but quickly agreed to partner with me, offering office space and support. By 9 o'clock, I called Walter Thorne. His voice was ragged, indicating he had not slept a single minute. Julian, thank goodness. When can you start? I am not coming back as an employee, I said calmly. I have launched my own firm. If you want my help, you will have to hire Advanced Systems Integration. My rate is $350 per hour, with a 100-hour minimum retainer paid up front. Walter spluttered, calling it extortion, but I told him it was simply the market setting the price for my worth. Within 15 minutes, he agreed to the terms. By noon, the signed contract was in my email inbox, and the bank confirmed a wire transfer for my first week of work as an independent contractor. I did not rush back to Aura Systems immediately. Instead, I spent the afternoon finalizing the registration for my limited liability company, setting up business accounts, and launching a basic website. I wanted them to sweat a little longer, to feel the true weight of my absence. It was exactly 4 in the afternoon when I finally walked through the glass doors of Aura Systems, wearing the same casual clothes I had worn when I was fired the day before. Carlos, the security guard, did a double take as I signed the visitor log. Mr. Vance, I thought you were, he started before trailing off. Do you need an escort, he asked. No thank you, Carlos, I replied with a smile. I think I know my way around. The executive floor was a scene of chaotic energy. Administrative assistants hurried between offices with stacks of papers, and through the glass walls of the main conference room, I could see board members arguing heatedly. Nobody paid attention to me until I walked down to the IT department. The scene there was sobering. My former colleagues looked completely shell-shocked, with empty coffee cups cluttering every desk. Some of them had clearly been working in the office all night. Maya Patel spotted me first, her exhausted face lighting up with relief. Julian, she said, rushing over to whisper, it is an absolute nightmare. Nothing is working, and Oliver Brooks has been locked in his office since midnight. He apparently had a panic attack. When he realized that none of the junior technicians knew how to locate the script directories, let alone restart them. The atmosphere in the department was heavy with anxiety. People were huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones about the financial ruin facing the company. I walked past the row of cubicles, noticing how everyone was staring at their screens, desperately typing commands that did nothing. Maya Patel explained that Oliver Brooks had spent the entire morning screaming at the junior developers, demanding that they restore the databases. The junior developers, who had only been hired a few months ago to work on the glossy new interface, had no idea how the legacy systems worked. They did not even know where the main server rack was located, let alone how to access the server logs. Maya told me that Oliver had locked himself in his office after realizing that the entire company was losing money by the minute, and the responsibility would fall entirely on him. I asked where the crisis team was working, and Maya pointed to the large project room. Inside, 24 people were gathered around whiteboards covered in diagrams of the company architecture, most of which were completely incorrect. They had confused the primary cloud server with our local testing environments, creating a map that made no technical sense. I pushed the door open, and all conversation stopped instantly. Walter Thorne stood at the front of the room, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. Julian is here as an external consultant, Walter announced to the room. He will be leading the recovery effort. I set my bag down on the table and looked at the crowd. Everyone who is not directly involved with system operations or production, Please leave the room, I said. More than half the room cleared out immediately, including the human resources representatives and the high-priced efficiency consultants who had recommended my termination. They slunk away, refusing to meet my gaze. Let us start with what is actually happening here, I said, picking up an eraser and clearing the incorrect diagrams from the whiteboard. Your problem is not a software crash. It is a complete communication breakdown between 5 distinct legacy systems that I was manually bridging every single day. For the next 3 hours, I explained the actual technical infrastructure of Aura systems to the remaining team. I did not show them the idealized diagrams from the official documentation, but the messy, real-world connections that kept the company alive. I detailed how the database tables from the 90s Unix mainframe had to be synchronized with the inventory management software, a process that required a custom translator script I had written. Why was none of this documented? Demanded Lawrence Pierce, the chief technology officer, who had joined the company just 6 months ago. He had come from a trendy software startup where everything was built on clean, modern cloud tools and had absolutely zero experience with ancient enterprise database systems. I turned to him slowly, keeping my expression neutral. It was, I replied. I submitted comprehensive documentation every quarter, and I filed enhancement requests every month. I even presented these issues at your very first executive committee meeting. Lawrence's face turned red, and he looked uncomfortable. I do not recall that, he muttered. It was on the 12th of February, I said. You spent the presentation checking emails on your phone, and then you told the committee to table the legacy discussion and focus on future architecture. The room went silent, and Lawrence stared at his shoes. By 9 in the evening, we had emergency protocols in place to restore basic production. By midnight, I had trained a small team on temporary workarounds to keep things moving. I finally left the building at 2 in the morning, exhausted but deeply satisfied. For the next 2 weeks, I worked 18-hour days stabilizing the systems at Aura Systems. However, I did not work from their offices. Instead, I operated from a sleek co-working space that Dev Joshi had helped me secure. I joined all progress meetings virtually, my face appearing on the large screens in their conference rooms. I trained their internal staff remotely, and I made sure every single workaround was documented in precise detail. By day 10 of my contract, their production capacity had reached 80%. By day 14, the systems were fully operational again. As my initial retainer ended, Walter Thorne requested a 6-month contract extension. We need to rebuild the entire system properly, he said during our video call. You are the only person who understands how all these pieces fit together. I named my new rate, which was double my initial premium fee, and he agreed without a single objection. Meanwhile, my new business was growing rapidly. I hired my first 2 employees, Felix Cole and Chloe Miller, both of whom were brilliant system architects who had been overlooked and undervalued at their previous employers. We secured a permanent office space downtown, and Dev Joshi referred 3 new clients to us, all of whom were smaller manufacturing companies facing similar integration struggles. They were relieved to find a firm that specialized in rescuing legacy systems rather than forcing them into expensive, disruptive software upgrades. Felix was a master of old SQL databases and legacy mainframes, the kind of person who could read raw database logs like a book. Chloe was incredibly skilled at writing modern API wrappers for older systems, allowing them to communicate with cloud platforms seamlessly. Together, we established our new workflow. We worked out of a bright, spacious office downtown, filled with whiteboards and monitors. Our clients were thrilled to have access to a dedicated team that understood their unique technical challenges. 4 weeks after my humiliating dismissal, I sat in a high-floor conference room at Vanguard Industrial, the largest competitor of Aura Systems. Their chief executive officer, Eleanor Grant, had reached out to me directly. We have heard impressive things about your recovery work at Aura, she said, leaning back. Our recent growth has created identical integration challenges, and we want to avoid their mistakes. We need an architect who understands how to bridge the old with the new. When I met with Eleanor Grant in the executive boardroom of Vanguard Industrial, I was struck by how different the culture was compared to Aura Systems. Vanguard was a company that valued technical expertise over corporate buzzwords. Eleanor sat across from me at the massive table, drinking green tea, and listened intently as I described how legacy integration could save them millions of dollars in infrastructure costs. She did not check her phone or interrupt me once. She understood that replacing their entire back-end software would cost them $50 million and take 2 years, whereas my firm could build a stable bridge in 2 months for a fraction of the cost. We discussed the project timeline in detail. Eleanor wanted to make sure that the integration would not affect their current production schedules. I assured her that by using our specialized, non-intrusive scripts, we could perform the integration in the background without a single second of downtime. She was deeply impressed by our technical approach and our understanding of legacy databases. She noted that larger consultancies always insisted on scraping everything and starting from scratch, which was both expensive and risky. I explained that we could help, but I felt obligated to mention that Aura Systems was currently our largest client. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "We are well aware of that," she replied with a sharp smile. "In fact, that is exactly why we want to work with you. Anyone who can rescue them from their own self-created disaster is someone we want on our side." I left her office with a signed contract in hand, realizing that my former employer had inadvertently handed me my biggest client. On my drive back to my office, my phone rang. It was Walter Thorne, and his voice sounded incredibly tense. "Julian, we need to discuss our arrangement," he said. "The board is starting to question the high rates we are paying your firm." I reminded him that those were the precise rates we had agreed upon. "Yes, but now that the emergency is past, we want to bring this work back in-house. We would like to offer you your old job back, at a director level with a substantial equity package." I pulled my car into a parking spot and turned off the engine. "No," I replied simply. "Julian, be reasonable," Walter pleaded. "This consulting arrangement is not sustainable for the company. Perhaps not for you, but it is highly sustainable for me," I answered. I paused for a moment before adding, "I am meeting with Vanguard Industrial tomorrow. Should I tell them that I am now exclusive to Aura Systems?" A heavy, dead silence stretched over the phone line. Finally, Walter spoke, his voice filled with anger. "You are consulting for Vanguard? They are our direct competitor. I am consulting for 7 companies now, Walter, and 3 of them are in your industry. My firm is growing. This feels vindictive," he spat. "No, Walter," I replied, "this is simply capitalism. The very same system that made it easy for you to eliminate my position has now made it possible for me to build something far better." 3 months passed in a blur of growth. Advanced Systems integration moved from my dining room table to a small office, and finally to a full floor in a modern downtown building. We grew to a team of 12 specialists, including integration architects and project managers. I hired Maya Patel as my operations director, and she had given her notice at Aura Systems the Monday after we had coffee. Oliver Brooks looked like he was going to faint when she handed him her resignation, asking if I had put her up to it. She told him I had offered her double her salary and equity in a growing firm, and he had no response. By month 4, we had contracts with 15 clients. Aura Systems remained our client, but their share of our revenue had dropped from 100% to barely 30%. Our team was thriving in the new office space. We had set up a large collaboration area with whiteboards, where the architects could map out client systems together. We had a weekly tradition of ordering lunch from a local deli, sitting around the main table to discuss both technical challenges and our personal lives. It was the kind of supportive, transparent culture that I had always wanted at Aura Systems, but was never allowed to build. Maya Patel managed our operations with incredible efficiency, keeping our client communications smooth and ensuring our developers had everything they needed to succeed. Her presence allowed me to focus on strategic growth and high-level client consultations. Maya Patel's resignation was the final blow for Oliver Brooks. When Maya walked into his office on Monday morning and handed him her 2 weeks' notice, he looked like he had seen a ghost. He tried to offer her a 20% raise on the spot, promising to promote her to a senior manager role by the end of the quarter. Maya simply smiled and declined the offer, explaining that she was looking for a company that valued her expertise and offered a positive, collaborative environment. Oliver was left speechless, realizing that his best engineer was leaving to join the person he had fired in front of the entire department. One Tuesday morning, Walter Thorne requested an urgent in-person meeting at their headquarters. I asked Dev Joshi to join me, and the next day we walked into their lobby together. We were directed to the executive conference room, where we found Walter, his entire executive team, and a man named Miles Kellerman, the corporate counsel. Walter looked grim. Miles Kellerman slid a folder across the table toward me. "We have prepared a cease and desist letter regarding your work with Vanguard Industrial," he said. "We believe you are misappropriating proprietary information." Dev Joshi laughed out loud, but I remained calm. I did not touch the folder. I leaned forward, looking directly at Walter. "I have my own folder for you," I said, sliding a document across the table. "This is a draft of a lawsuit for wrongful termination, defamation, and tortious interference with business relationships." Walter frowned, but his eyes widened as he read the document. "I have documented evidence that my termination was part of a discriminatory pattern," I explained. "I also have internal communications showing you knew my job functions but misrepresented them to the board. Furthermore, we have documented instances where your sales team contacted my clients, trying to damage my business. Under California Penal Code Section 470, which covers the forgery and falsification of corporate records, and under the doctrines of tortious interference and breach of fiduciary duty, we are prepared to file this immediately." The emails showed that Walter Thorne had actively conspired with Oliver Brooks to eliminate my position, claiming it was redundant while knowing full well that my work was critical to the company's daily operations. Walter's face turned pale, and Miles Kellerman whispered something in his ear. "We accept your terms," Walter said quietly. The confrontation was a turning point. Word spread that a small firm had stood up to Aura Systems and won. 1 year after being told my position did not exist, I stood before my company of 58 employees, cutting a celebration cake. The office erupted in cheers as Maya Patel raised a toast to our success. Later that evening, a delivery arrived at our office. It was a large arrangement of flowers with a card signed by Clara Westing, the chairwoman of the board. She had called me a week earlier to explain that Walter Thorne and Lawrence Pierce had been dismissed by the board due to declining profits. She had offered to acquire my firm for $30 million, but I had turned it down, choosing instead to remain an independent partner. When Clara Westing called me to discuss the acquisition, her tone was respectful and direct. She explained that the board of directors had recognized that my firm held all the keys to their operational stability. The acquisition offer was a life-changing amount of money, and it would have made me and my key employees wealthy overnight. I discussed the proposal with Dev Joshi and Maya Patel. While the money was incredibly tempting, we all realized that we loved the freedom of running our own business. We did not want to go back to being employees of a large, rigid corporation, even at the level of executives. The card read, "Respect earned is better than respect given. Congratulations on your success." I placed the flowers at the reception desk. The perfect revenge was not making them suffer, but creating something they could never own, proving that the best response to being undervalued is to prove yourself right.